Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. Today, I have as my special guest Betsy DeVille. Welcome, Betsy.
Thanks so much. I'm so happy to be here.
I met Betsy at the American Atheist Conference. And the reason that she ended up on the show is when I saw her, she had a table and she had a number of different atheist gifts. And if you look in the description, there is a link to Betsy's Etsy. And we'll talk about that in a minute, but there was one particular thing on her table that drew my attention, and that was that Betsy has authored a book entitled Grief for Atheists. And I was recently at the funeral of the father of a close friend, and this friend was a strong believer, and the funeral was held in a church. And so all of the religious overtones of the funeral didn't bother me at all because I realized that that's what this person needed. But I also realized how inappropriate just about everything at that funeral was for my own personal funeral, and particularly the music. And so I wrote a song specifically that is intended to be used at a secular funeral. And so that kind of was on my mind at the time when I picked up the book. And Betsy, I think this couldn't be any more appropriate for people because I think that's one of the things that the atheist community is lacking right now is the support that one gets from a religious community at a time of death. So tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about that book.
Yeah, thank you so much. As you mentioned, I'm Betsy DeVille, and I've actually been active in the atheist community as an artist and writer for over 10 years. I actually started my studio after I attended the American Atheist Convention in Austin in 2013. So
Okay.
this year was a bit of a homecoming, and I loved the community, and I wanted a way to show my secular values. Because
Hmm.
atheists, we have a pretty positive worldview, and uniquely, we don't actually think that if we just say the right words to the right God in the right place, the world is suddenly going to be better. We understand that we've got to do the work to make the
Hmm.
world better. And there have been so many incredible atheists throughout history that said what needed to be said, kind of damn the outcome, right? So
Hmm.
all the work that I do reflects that our secular values should be celebrated and honored. But when we talk about grief and we talk about some of the other ways that we kind of have friction with the communities around us,
Hmm.
grief is definitely a sticky wicket. I I started working on this book after my mom passed away, and I went looking for resources, and I really didn't find anything. A lot of the stuff,
Mm.
yeah, there was a lot out there that either it had something about a toxic positivity vibe that grief is going to somehow be transformative, which many of us have not found to be true.
Hmm.
Or it would have, some kind of, even if it said it wasn't religious, it would still have some kind of higher power or some other kind of woo kind of thing in there. And I just found all that really, really helpful and it didn't work. So I actually have a social science research background and I spent some time teaching science. So I partnered with some experts, including some
Did
neuroscientists. Go ahead.
did you say science or social science?
I have a social science research background in
Okay. Okay.
psychology, and I actually used to teach science at a museum.
Okay.
So I partnered with some experts, and I just
Mhm.
want to give a shout out to Jennifer Crow at Crow J Consulting. She is a grief and trauma counselor, and she was a great partner with me on this project. And I jumped in to really develop something for our community that was specifically for atheists, but it was actually evidence based. And it actually gave you actionable steps that you could take to feel a little bit better and a little bit less alone.
Okay. And what are some of those steps?
So
I
they're
I
kind
I don't want you to reveal the whole book because we do
of
want
right.
people to buy it, but just give us enough of a teaser that we might want some more.
Yeah. So, really, in the book, I talk about what grief actually is
Mm.
and
Mhm.
also what it kind of isn't. So there are some old theories that are still getting a lot of traction today that can be really unhelpful for a person
Oh,
experiencing grief.
okay.
There are also social norms that it's to have awareness of because they might be even within you around how you're supposed to grieve.
Mm.
Could get real People can get real wrapped around their axle where I think I'm supposed to be doing this, but actually this, that sort of cognitive dissonance that we experience, and really unpacking that for yourself so that you
Mhm.
can better understand what's actually true for you. And then I
Mhm.
have a lot of actionable things like ways to explore all the different feelings that you might be having and ways to take care of yourself because it's super important. Grief is very, very physical. And it's really important to take care of yourself and to not feel like that's indulgent. Um, yeah. And then I also, I give you a lot of practical tools and resources. And there's really three themes. It's super important to be gentle with yourself. It's super important to stay in the present. And it's super important to learn from what works. And the book, as you know, kind of is almost like a workbook where you have different activities and exercises in there.
Is it okay to not feel what you're supposed to be feeling?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's
Mhm.
awesome when you acknowledge that for yourself.
Mhm.
Grief can be complicated, particularly with complicated relationships,
Mhm.
and you can have a lot of different feelings.
I
Someone go ahead.
I've seen a number of people critical of how other people handle their grief, and one particular instance comes to mind of, I know a woman who was very critical of her mother because when her father died, her mother's response was, "Well, at least now I don't have to battle anyone for the remote." And she just felt like her mother was being so trivial about her father's death, and I'm thinking, I think she's missed the point entirely.
Yeah, I agree. So, I think in that particular instance, it's never my place to judge someone else's grief experience.
Mhm.
They're probably doing it just right for themselves. It's my place as someone supporting another person experiencing grief to be along for the ride. And if she is celebrating that she doesn't have to battle for the remote, awesome. But I'm also, as someone taking care of my mom, going to be watching for other things that could be happening to make sure that
Mm,
she's taking care of herself and to make sure nothing
mhm.
else is happening because she could be kind of processing it in a slightly different way, or she could have a delayed processing of that grief. And that's okay. That's super normal.
Okay. Okay. BS Not Accepted points out grief isn't always about death, but it can also be the end of a relationship.
That is so true. And I'm so glad you surfaced that. I actually was meeting with a group of high school students to talk to them about grief this past week. And we talked a lot about the grief that we can experience where it isn't necessarily about a death, but it's
Mhm.
about a change that is maybe unexpected and unwanted.
Mm,
And I think the other thing to remember about grief is it's not a contest.
mm,
So it's not helpful to think about one type of grief being better or worse than another, or harder or easier than another. Everyone
mhm,
has a very unique experience. Yeah, no, it's the places where society crashes into us around grief are so interesting to explore from a scientific perspective because yeah, people do things where they kind of want to distance themselves. And so people experiencing grief, let's say someone very close to you passes away and they had lung cancer and they had been a very heavy smoker. Sometimes people will act as though that, well, they had to have known they were going to get lung cancer and die. Like it's this weird thing that humans like to do where we want to insulate ourselves
or
from
maybe
the
justify?
Yeah, they like to insulate themselves, they like to justify. You also have I've talked with people who had someone telling them that the death of a loved one was their fault because they weren't right with God,
Mm. Oh,
which
that is so rough.
mhm, yeah, no, it's really, really rough. But yeah, other grief can be around losing a special relationship. The high school students that I spoke with, we talked about the different seasons of their lives.
Mhm.
Leaving high school, going to college, that's a huge change.
Mm, mhm, mhm. Yeah, I remember when one of my kids finished preschool and, well, it's my middle child, and when she finished she had been just absolutely gung ho for kindergarten. She wanted to go to kindergarten. But when she finished preschool and she suddenly realized she wouldn't be going to preschool anymore, she was in tears.
Hmm.
You know, she it just had never dawned on her that going to kindergarten meant leaving preschool, and she just that was a little rough for her.
Hmm. No, it's a new season. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's something I talk with my kids about is, you know, there are different seasons in our lives. You know, we moved cross country not long ago, and it was a really big change of season for them. But it's so nice that she was able to talk about it and that she was able to express those feelings. So kudos to you for being open to that. That's really awesome.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that because I I'm not a person that has strong emotions for the most part, and sometimes I have a little bit of difficulty connecting and making people feel that, yeah, I'm really listening to you and I'm really understanding you. I just because I tend to come off as being detached.
Hmm.
Godseed says, I process grief with booze, drugs, and violence. What do you think of that comment?
Well, I would say that those particular habits are not going to be helpful over the long term. And it's important when we talk about self care to think about things that are going to benefit our bodies over the long term. Because obviously, you know, alcohol, drugs, you're talking about neurotoxins there. Your body is a machine that you live in, just like a car, right? And you're not going to put sand in your gas tank.
Yeah, I think he was kidding. Right now, a lot of people in this country are probably going through grief for the loss of property. You know, we had all those tornadoes, and there are so many people that have lost their homes. Many of them have lost all of their possessions. So are we looking at a time when a lot of people are going through grief?
I think so. I think though that yeah, that's such a different thing to process everything, right? When
Mhm.
you lose everything, that's so heavy. Um, but yeah, we certainly are. We also have a pretty big loneliness epidemic happening in our country right now.
Mm.
So I'm delighted to connect with everyone here today.
Do you think that loneliness epidemic is fueled a lot by social media?
I do.
Mhm.
I think you know, there was it's a European country that just did a big research study around children not having access to their cellular phones during school. And what they found was bullying dropped, self esteem was raised, kids were generally happier. And the more restriction that the kids had, the better their lives were.
Mm. Okay.
So, yeah, no, I think social media is definitely a double edged sword. I mean, it certainly is great because it lets people who are, say, atheists in a small community connect with one another,
Mhm.
but it
Mhm.
also lets us put filters on the real world and show this sort of shiny, happy people thing that's not actually true. And then everyone feels like they have to live up to expectations that are just simply not attainable.
Godseed has a follow-up comment. It says, really, I use self-destruction because my trauma causes me to blame myself for the end of a relationship or the death of others. So I punish myself for my perceived failure.
Wow, that's really powerful to talk about. One thing to think about when you're experiencing that is a thing called cognitive reappraisal. So, cognitive appraisal is where everyone has a thing we do called self talk, right?
Mhm.
So, self talk is the way that we talk about ourselves to ourselves. And cognitive appraisal and reappraisal is cognitive appraisal is when we are assessing an emotional situation. We evaluate how that event is going to affect us, and then we interpret the various aspects of the event. So, God, see, this is the part that's important to you, that word interpret. We arrive at a response based on that interpretation. And that's where things can go a little bit sideways. I sometimes joke with our kids that sometimes our brains will build a little conspiracy theory for us,
Mm.
right? And so the
Mhm.
strategy to use if you're experiencing that, you know, you're blaming yourself, is called cognitive reappraisal. And
Mm.
that's super deliberate thought process where we're going to change the meaning of those emotional events to alter our emotional experience in a beneficial and true way. So instead of thinking it was all my fault, right? We can
Mhm.
remind ourselves that we actually did the best we could at the time with the information and experience that we had. And maybe we would do something differently today, but we did our best in that moment and it was enough.
Yeah, there's a comedian that was talking about Mother's Day cards, and he was saying that every Mother's Day card you read all says, "You were the best mother in the world. Happy Mother's Day to the best and the sweetest and the most wonderful mother." And why can't we ever find a card that says, "Mom, you did the best you could."
Right? Because that's what's true for all of us, right? We all did the best we could. I know my own mom certainly did the best she could with the cards that she was dealt.
Mhm, mhm. There's one comment that I've been holding for a while because it wasn't pertinent, but we really do need to answer this question, and that is, "Please tell me you're not related to Cruella DeVille."
Right. No. So her name is actually DeVille. She does not have the French LE at the end.
Mm,
Yeah,
okay.
it's a family name. What can I say?
Okay, and Purple Rhymes with Orange says, "For some things, grief reemerges at random. End of this month will mark 10 years since my fiance died. Sometimes shopping and seeing a perfect gift for her can still bring tears to my eyes."
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that with us. I'm sorry for your loss. Yeah, that's super duper normal. So there's a concept called a ball in a box, which is a way to think about what you're experiencing, and that is when we first have an experience of grief. The grief is this ball, and we are this box, and the ball pretty much fills the box. It's always rubbing up against the sides of the box, and we have a lot of awareness of it. But over time, the box gets bigger as our lives grow, as yours has over the last 10 years. And, but the ball is still there. And it still is going to bump up against the sides of the box from time to time. You know, I mean, my mom passed away many years ago, and I still think sometimes, oh, I need to get her some new shoes. Or
Mm,
she would love this recipe. Or I'm so sad she's not seeing my kids do this. Yeah, that's a super normal thing. And um, it actually, a way to also think about that as you're continuing that relationship. Because
mhm,
the thing is, with grief is not something that just ends. Like the notion that there are these 5 stages and then you're done, that's a bunch of garbage. Grief
mhm.
isn't ever going to be solved. It's just going to be carried.
One thing that I have kept from my religious days is in the religious community they used to say, well, Jesus lives in your heart. You know, you can't see him, you can't feel him, but he lives in your heart. And I think that is true of our deceased ancestors, our relatives and friends.
Mhm.
Is, you know, even though we can't see them, they're not with us, they're still here in our hearts, and as long as they're in our hearts and our minds, they have not truly died.
Yeah, I love that. So in science, we call that continuing bonds theory. And I think
Mm,
it's a really, really valuable. One of the things that's society gets real wrong about grief is this idea that at some point you're done. Like
mhm,
someone told me the other day, their spouse had passed away. They came back to work 10 days later after their terrible bereavement leave. Like they were given very little time to process it. Their boss comes in, dumps a bunch of work on their desk, and they're not getting it done as quickly because they're
mhm,
grieving. And when they have a conversation with their boss about their performance, their boss says, well, I thought you would be fine by now.
mhm,
And that's absurd. It's absurd. But continuing bonds theory says we still have a relationship with that person. No,
mhm.
they're not going to give you a hug. They're not going to respond. But that doesn't mean you cannot still talk to them. You can't still learn things about them. There's nothing I love more than when a friend of my mom tells me a funny story about her that I didn't know. That's wonderful. And that lets me stay connected. And I think we should all be encouraged to stay connected. That doesn't make you weird. That makes you normal. And that makes you, yeah, you're fulfilling that continuing bonds. And that's something everyone needs.
Pensapali says, I have pre-grieved the loss of my parents and grandparents while they were alive, but ailing due to age and poor health. And so the loss when they passed was not so hard. I've never heard
Interesting.
of that. Have you?
Um, there is what's called anticipatory grieving.
Mhm.
Um, which I think of it as almost like a little bit of an extension of anxiety, right? I'm paying tax on a bill before it's due.
Mhm.
However, you're going to do what works for you. I would not make the assumption that if I have been grieving an anticipatory loss, like my mom had Alzheimer's, for example, that suddenly when she does die, it's somehow going to be easier. I don't think
Mhm.
those two things are both true. They could be for some people, but I
Mhm.
don't think one should assume, oh, this loss is going to be super easy because I've already done the grieving work. Because the grieving work doesn't actually ever stop, right?
Mhm.
If you've had a big loss in your life, it's always there. It's
Yeah.
never gone. And it comes at you out of left field
Mhm.
when you least expect it. As that other commenter shared, where you're just walking through the mall, living your best life, and suddenly you're like, oh, that person would have loved this.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. One of my greatest regrets is that my mother died before I became an atheist, and I think my mother would have been so happy to know that I finally found my way out of religion.
Oh, that's it's I mean, maybe you can still talk to her about it. She
That's
won't hear you, but you can
right.
always tell her.
Mhm. Mhm. Purple Rhymes with Orange says, Sloth Girl and I are pre-grieving together as Cancer has her clock ticking down. Sloth Girl is Purple's roommate.
I'm so sorry to hear that. I do hope you're getting the treatment that you need, and that you're thinking about clinical trials because I think that stuff is super important. In my opinion, no one has your best
Sloth
interests
Girl
in
is
mind.
is getting cancer treatment, yes.
Oh, good, good, good. But yeah, you have to think about like what are the big rocks that we want to put in our buckets.
Mhm.
If our ride on the blue ball, we know it's going to be shorter.
Okay, Mark Caesar asks the most important possible question, which is what is the best way to support someone who's going through grief?
I love this question so much. So, how do you support someone else? So, the first thing that I think it's helpful to think about is this idea we call ring theory. And ring theory is when someone is in a crisis and you are outside of the crisis to think deeply about your place there. So, when you're talking to a person closer to the crisis than you, like you're talking to the person who's experiencing grief, your goal is just to push in love and help. Just listening is way more helpful than talking. And you can ask yourself if you're going to say something, is this going to provide comfort and support? And if it isn't, then just don't say it. So you don't want to say, you should hear what happened to me. You don't want to say, here's what I would do if I were you. You want to say, this must be really hard for you. Or,
Mm,
can I bring you dinner? The other thing that's really important to think about when you're supporting another person is, as I mentioned, grief is not something that's going to be solved. So we have this desire to go into problem solving mode, and this problem cannot be solved. It can only be carried. And remember, you're along for the ride. You're not in the driver's seat. So you're going to follow that person's lead. Sometimes things they do may not make sense to you. And that is okay because you're not here to be right. You're here to be connected, right? So ask before you do something, even if it's something small, like, I'm going to tidy up some papers on a desk. Ask first. Maybe they want the papers that way. You don't know that, right?
mhm,
And does it
mhm,
make sense to you? No, it doesn't, but it doesn't have to.
mhm.
And then just be there, right? Be there in the silence, be there for the ugly cry, listen, be patient. Another thing that's really important to do is to do the emotional labor of reaching out. So don't ask them, what can I do? Because now you're making them do the work of thinking of something and asking you for
Mm,
it, which is
mhm,
hard. First, it's
mm,
hard to even organize your brain when you're experiencing grief. But
mhm.
secondly, it's hard to ask other people for help. That's not easy for a lot of people. So
Yeah.
volunteer with a specific thing. Hey, your trash needs to go out on Tuesday. I'm going to drag it to the curb. Okay. Awesome. Hey, your lawn needs to be mowed. I'm going to handle that. Hey, I'm going to get tickets to this show. Can I get one for you? And I'll pick you up at 2 o'clock. Those are all really great things to do. The other thing to remember, though, is they may have to bail out at the last minute. And
Mhm,
that has to be okay with you. And it has nothing to do with you at
mm,
all. right? You just let that go.
Mhm.
Another thing that's super important to remember is how much energy grief takes, and that it's
Mm,
going to hit them, as we talked about, in lots of different ways. So, a great idea is to put little reminders on your calendar of special
mhm,
days for them, the birthday, the death anniversary, whatever, Monday Night Football, whenever you feel like that could hit them. And you can
mhm,
just send them a message. Hey, I'm thinking about you. You can send something that doesn't even need a response to help them stay connected to you.
mhm.
So they may not pick up when you call. You might knock on the door and they may not come. That's okay. That's fine. Just, I'm thinking about you today. Or something funny like, oh my gosh, my cat keeps waking me up at 5 o'clock in the morning, insisting on being fed. Like just something that'll make them smile, a funny meme. They don't have to respond. It's
Mhm,
just a little touch, right?
mhm.
Um, Games can also be super helpful. I don't know if anybody here plays
Hmm.
video games. Let us know in the chat.
A
That's
lot of
a,
us do, and
yeah,
yeah, I'm a gamer myself.
yeah, that is super clutch because you can hop on and play a game together. What's
Mhm,
great about gaming is a deliberate attempt to try to get better at something, and it reminds you that you can, and it gives you an adjacent activity. Sometimes people, it's easier for them to talk about big stuff when they're not face to face. Sometimes it's
mm,
easier when they're side by side. And you
mhm,
can be in your game chat, or if you're on Discord, whatever that is. Hey, how's
mhm.
it going? And they might just tell you what's up, right? Or they might just lose themselves in the magic flow state that is gaming. And that is awesome too.
That's cool. That's
Yeah,
cool.
but don't forget to get support for yourself, because helping somebody who's experiencing grief is
Mm,
heavy, and you need to take care of yourself.
okay. Okay. Good advice, good advice. Okay, I'm gonna turn our conversation just a bit.
Yeah,
Betsy also has an Etsy, and she has lots of atheist gifts.
I do.
And I'm gonna tell you a funny little story about me, and that is I've only been an atheist for almost 5 years now. And when I became an atheist, my Christian faith just disappeared pretty much in an instant. It was not a slow, gradual thing. And one of the first things I realized right after I became an atheist was I need new clothes because almost
Yeah.
every t-shirt I owned was from some church event. And it said Jesus something or prayer something or they all had Christian, but I need new clothes.
That is so funny. Because I see these shirts, right? I
Mhm,
see the
mhm.
shirts and I'm like, oh my word, right? Um, that's super funny. I never even thought about that. We should have some kind of ceremony that people do as we welcome them to atheism, like a bonfire of the,
Mm.
a bonfire of the James Avery. Yeah, no, you guys, you can you can find me online at betsydeville.com. You can also find me on Etsy. And actually, if you go to betsydeville.com today, one of the things I have is a really fun grief for atheists bingo card.
Mm,
So a lot of times when you're experiencing grief, you're going to go into a situation and you're going to probably be bombarded with just such Christian positivity. He's walking with the Lord now. So unhelpful, so annoying, and it can get so heavy. And so when my mom passed away, I actually made myself this bingo card, because you might have a day where you have to make a lot of phone calls and people are going
mhm,
to say some stuff. And so instead of even tuning into that comment, you go for the bingo,
mm.
right? And it has all the things that people are going to say to you, and you can get yourself a bingo. But yeah, if you pop to my website and you sign up, I'll send you a bingo card.
Oh,
Um,
cool.
yeah, I'll send you a bingo card. And then if you do sign up for the bingo card, I'll do a drawing today and I'll send somebody a signed book.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Purple Rhymes with Orange says, when I found the atheist YouTube community, I started collecting t-shirts of the creators I watched. And that's exactly what I did. I own a Godless Engineer shirt. I own a Daily Atheist shirt, even though he's gone. I have a Lisa the Rainbow Giraffe shirt from The Skeptic. And I have 3 Viced Rhino sweatshirts.
That's awesome. The shirt that people seem to like the most of mine is Above Us Only Sky.
Hmm.
In fact, I had someone order that from Saudi Arabia, where it is illegal to be an
Neat.
atheist.
Uh-huh.
And it was funny because I was somewhat unprepared to have a shipment go to Saudi Arabia, but I was like, I'm just going to figure out how to make this happen because this person obviously needs this shirt.
Mhm. Mhm. And that one is sufficiently,
You can wear it anywhere.
neutral, yeah, that no one's
Hmm.
gonna look at that and arrest them for being an atheist.
Yep. Yep. You could just be like, oh, I just like the Beatles.
Mhm.
Yeah. No, I like to play in that place of conversation more than in that place of confrontation because
Mm.
I find we have more in common than we think. And I find that when people come to know me as a person and
Mhm.
then find out that I'm an atheist, I'm at that point, I'm already credible to them as a citizen of the world, right? I'm already credible to them as a community member. And so suddenly it becomes a lot more palatable and they stop thinking that we all just eat babies. Yeah, so I like that is the place that I like to play is the place of, oh, that is very true. Like there's a great Marcus Aurelius quote, and they can identify with it, and then they realize, oh well, maybe we have something in common, or maybe they start to question themselves what's true.
Mhm. Mhm. Another book that you have is Christmas for Atheists. Tell us a little bit about that
Yeah,
book.
yeah. So Christmas for Atheists is a book about all the themes that are really common in the winter holiday season that you might think were Christian, but they're not. And the book invites us as we, for people who have just began to identify as an atheist, or the other place where I find Christmas for Atheists helpful is if you're a person who perhaps grew up with religion and are now a non-believer, and now you have a family. So you have little people in your house, and you want to think about how do I approach these holidays and how do I stay true to who I am and still celebrate some festivities at the end of the year, right? And
Mhm.
so it really
Mhm.
invites you to reconsider all of those traditions and decide what's going to work for you, which is really fun. Christmas is something that is very much for atheists. And there are so many end of the year traditions that have absolutely nothing to do with the birth of Jesus, which did not even happen in the winter time.
Mhm.
And so we all have opportunities to celebrate together, to celebrate wonder and light and all of those things at the end of the year.
Yeah, I tend to avoid being with, the one child I have that's still very religious at Christmas time because I don't want to go to church and I don't want to have to listen to all the religious garbage, but I don't want to avoid my grandchildren either. But the way I solve the problem is I simply go for New Year's rather than for Christmas.
Yes, that's what we send out for cards in our family is I send out Happy New Year cards
Mhm.
because everyone has a calendar. We all
Mhm.
pretty much use the Gregorian calendar. So guess what? It's January 1st for everybody. Yeah, that's how we sort of sidestep it too. That's so interesting. Tell me about you said you had your moment of like suddenly you were an atheist, and mine was definitely a moment too.
Okay.
Yeah, I know so many people have a longer deconstruction.
Mhm.
And mine was almost like two steps. So I grew up in a very small community. I went to
Uh-huh.
Catholic school all the way through college. I went to a public university where some friends were going, Granny, and I saw condoms in the vending machine and I about had a heart attack. It was the second time in my life I'd ever seen them. Like it was like so sheltered, so sheltered. And my family made us go to church. And so we would maybe go play at the park and then sneak the bulletin because going to church wasn't important to us. But then again, once I got to college, I didn't have to go because no one was paying attention. And I was confronted with um, a student in my dorm was raped and wanted to have an abortion.
Mm.
And the vitriol that she was met with, I was staggered by it. Like
Mhm.
she was just shamed and it was ridiculous. It was ridiculous. And so that's when I was like, okay, this organized religion bit's not for me. But I
Mhm.
think I still kind of thought maybe there was a higher power. They just weren't really paying attention. Like maybe there was a creator thing.
Mhm.
But my sort of moment was when I held my first child
Mm.
and I looked down at him and I knew in my bones, like lightning, No one is protecting him but me. This is it. Like, that's
Mm.
it. And that was for me the moment of just like, nope, that's all hogwash. Because
Mm.
you had kind of a hogwash moment too, right? Where you're just like,
I
nope.
did, but mine was very different from yours. But first, before I get to
Yeah.
that, because most of the audience has already heard this story, but I'll tell it again anyway. But you mentioned something that brought up something in my mind that I have not related, I don't think, ever. And that is my reaction to a girl that I met in law school. Now, I went to Baylor Law School, which is a
Ah, I know
Baptist law
Baylor.
school. You know Baylor. Okay.
Oh, they got a lot of rules in Baylor. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And this girl was telling me that she had had an abortion. And I did not tell her what was going through my mind, but what was going, I did ask her, why she had an abortion when she was obviously a Baptist and didn't believe in abortion. And she said, well, I had to. I had no choice because I was in my undergrad years here at Baylor, and female students that are unmarried aren't allowed to be pregnant. So I either had to get an abortion or drop out of school. And I wanted to finish my schooling, so I got an abortion. And I didn't blame her for this, but I did blame the system. And I thought, what is broken about this system that says we think that abortion is the worst thing you can do, but if you want to stay here, you'd better do it.
That's interesting. I
Yeah.
wonder with the letter of the law versus, right? Because they certainly would not have wanted her to do that. They would
Yeah.
have wanted her to get married and drop out of school and stop
Hmm.
wearing shoes.
Or wouldn't it also be better if she had just, had the baby and was raised the child as a single mother?
Yeah. No,
That
you
that
can't do
also.
that at Baylor.
Mhm.
There's no single mothers allowed. That's not okay. Yeah. No, you can't win, right? I mean, really, it's, I don't abide misogyny. And so
Mhm.
much of religion is just misogyny. And
Yeah.
I can't with that. No, thank you.
Mhm.
Yeah, Godseed has a comment about teaching his son everything he knows. So there's actually a really great book called What Do You Believe? It's
Mhm.
by DK Books. And I really recommend it. So my kids grew up learning about every religion that exists. And it's been super helpful for them because as a parent, I think about, I don't want you to learn about it on the bus. So my
Mhm.
kids, they know so much about sex. They know so much about drugs. They know so much about religion. And they're very prepared as they go out into the world. The other thing to comment though around with your kids is navigating atheism, depending upon the community that you live in. So, we lived in the hill country near Austin where there were like two giant mega churches.
Mm.
And a lot of people were part of the scouting community, Boy Scouts of America, which requires you to believe in a higher power. So I lied on all the forms because my kids really wanted to be in scouts. And it was an interesting experience because I basically had to hide who I was so my kids would not be shunned. And
That's really something.
yeah, no, and now as they're older, they understand, they appreciate that, and they think about how to navigate their friendships because they've got close friends who are, Mormon, and
Mhm.
they talk about the fact that they don't believe, but
Mhm.
they navigate it so delicately. So Godseed, it's a great idea to tell your child what's up, so they're prepared.
Mhm. Well, my story is I mean, I was all in. First of all, I wasn't raised Christian. I was actually raised agnostic. Um, Although my parents were Catholic when I was very young, but they left the Catholic Church when I was 7, and they left over the issue of birth control. They wanted to use birth control, and the church taught that you're not allowed to do that, so they left the church. And my mother's position was always there is no God, but if there is a God, it's the Catholic God because the Catholic faith is the one true faith. But my dad's position was there is no God, period, or at least I don't think there is. Um, and so I wasn't really raised in a Christian faith, but at 16, I converted to Christianity as a result. Have you ever heard of the I Found It movement? I don't think you're old
No.
enough to remember that. That was in the 70s. There was this big revival called the I Found It movement. I found Jesus, and they were having all these rallies and revivals in stadiums and getting kids on fire to go and share their faith with other people. And I ended up coming to Christ through uh, another student who went to one of these rallies. Um, but I was all in. If the church doors were open, I was there and I was involved in everything. I mean, I was a church librarian. I sang in the choir. I taught VBS. I taught women's Bible studies in my home. I did everything. I was all in. And I also was very convinced that the Bible was the complete inerrant word of God. And the first major crack in my faith came when I started reflecting on the life of Paul. And I didn't realize I had done this until someone pointed this out to me, about 8 months later. But I reasoned my way into the divine hiddenness problem. And I started thinking about the Apostle Paul, and I thought, well, if God can personally appear to Paul and tell him exactly what he needs to know in order to believe, can't God do that for everybody? And if he can, why doesn't he? The Bible says that God desires for everyone to come to know him. So if that's what he wants, why doesn't he do it?
Mm-hmm.
And I know, everyone goes, free will, free will, free will. And okay, but didn't Paul have free will? If
Mm-hmm.
Jesus can come and appear to Paul and not violate his free will, why is it a violation of free will for God to appear to anybody else? So basically, I reasoned my way into the divine hiddenness problem. And at that point, I kind of pivoted to universalism. And I
Mm-hmm.
thought, the Bible tells us the story of what happens on earth, but it really tells us very little about what happens in heaven. So I came to think that maybe what really happens is that your chance to accept Christ does not end with death, but rather when you die, you'll come face to face to Christ, and he will lay all his cards on the table and say, this is who I am. This is what I'm all about. Do you want to spend eternity with me or not? And that you'll have a fully informed decision. Um, and that lasted for about 2 weeks. Because my son at that point was starting to introduce me to atheist material. And I was aware that my son no longer believed, although he says he didn't realize that I knew that at this point.
Mothers
Because
know everything. I don't know why they think we don't know. We know.
well, what's really funny is that he told me about how afraid he was of being kicked out of school because he didn't believe anymore. I sent all of my kids to Christian schools, K through 12, and my youngest at this point was 17 and was 3 weeks shy of graduation and was just scared to death that someone was going to find out that he didn't believe and that he was going to get kicked out of school and be told we're not going to graduate you because you're not a
Oh,
believer. And so we were keeping very quiet about it. At this point, I was still a believer, but I was aware that he was not. And once we had the diploma in hand, we were just so relieved. It was like, okay, he can come out of the closet now. He doesn't believe. But within about a month or two after that, he showed me a video of Aaron Ra
uh-huh.
at the ARC protest. Are you aware of the ARC protest?
The Ark, the museum, right?
Yeah, the
Uh-huh.
the Ken Ham's Museum in
Yep.
Kentucky. Once a year, there's an organized protest over the fact that that museum exists because of what it stands for, because of the drain on tax dollars that
Mm-hmm.
is to the state of Kentucky. Well, they have this protest, and there's this video, and Aaron Ra is talking to a guy, and he says, "We know that the flood didn't happen. Not that it couldn't happen, but that it didn't happen. And we know that from geology, biology, history." And when he said the word history, my faith vanished in a puff of smoke.
Wow.
And the reason is because I suddenly realized that not only did I know that he was right, but that I had always known that because I had never thought about the fact that from what I know of ancient Chinese history, there's never a time period when all of the people died
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
the entire land lay dormant for a minimum of 150 years because there's 100 years until the people start
Mhm.
migrating out of Babel, and it's gonna take them some time to get all the way to China. And we don't see that. And not only do we not see that, but if that had happened, we should find Babylonian pottery and art in China, and we don't
Mhm.
see that either.
Mhm. Mhm.
We see a continuous artifacts from the entire Neolithic period with no break and sudden change in the culture. And
Mhm.
so I suddenly realized that Aaron Ra was right. The flood didn't happen. And because my faith was grounded completely on sola scriptura, the complete inerrant word of God, one error
That was
means
it.
that was it.
Like the
Yeah,
house of cards, like you just flicked your fingers, house of cards
exactly.
fell.
Exactly. And I've had a number of people say, "Well, why does the flood have to happen in order for
It all
this
has to
thing?"
happen.
Right, exactly.
That's the
Why
story.
would a perfect God reveal himself to us in an imperfect book?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah,
Why
yeah.
would why would an omniscient God give us falsehoods and expect us to believe these falsehoods in order to know him? That makes no sense.
Yeah, it's, I mean, when you get in, like, none of the story really hangs together, like yeah, it just doesn't. We have a question, from Mark. Oh, we
Okay,
got
I'll
another
get to
one.
Mark's question first. Purple asks, Godless Crane, do you recall what year Ark protest that video was from? I was watching that in 2019, and that is the year that I became an atheist, was 2019, but the video was actually from 2017.
Okay.
Let's see.
Does anybody have
Is
any
this the
other?
question you were talking about?
Yeah, that one.
Okay, question for you. Did your religious participation and the way you influenced other people make you self-conscious about how you have influenced people, which has made against? Yes. And that is exactly why I do what I do, Mark Caesar, because I am so embarrassed about the fact that I have influenced a lot of people to believe that I almost feel like I have a duty to undo that damage. And, yeah, that's and I also think it's also quite normal because one thing I I had learned at one point was that if people are far right extremists and suddenly realize they're wrong, they don't usually move to the center. They move to far left extremist.
Mhm.
And I think that's really what happened to me is I was a religious extremist, and so now I'm not just an atheist, but I'm an anti-theist.
Interesting. Yeah, Catholic was always sort of, it was just cultural in the background. There's not the literal interpretation of the Bible. There's a lot of weird rules, right? Like my
Mhm.
grandmother used to tie rags on the sinks at night before Holy Communion, because of course Catholics believe in that transubstantiation. So no one would eat breakfast on Sunday mornings. It was, yeah, it was pretty intense. It was pretty intense.
Mark Caesar says, "Repent for your sins."
That's what you're doing.
That's right. That's what I'm doing. I'm repenting for my sins by talking about atheism.
Yeah, the word atheist, I'd love to hear in the chat how people feel about that word. When I was doing research on the title for my book, Grief for Atheists, some people find that word a little triggering. I
Mhm.
talked to people at the convention who said they would be nervous about having a book with that title on the bookshelf in their home. I'd love to hear from these, the folks in your audience. How do they approach that word? How do they think about it? So, for me, at my sort of full time job, I'm not very out as an atheist because we're at a place now, I think, in corporate culture where we're trying to be so accepting of other religions. Like we'll have a prayer room and we'll take breaks, and every holiday, every religious holiday gets celebrated. Um, but and it's completely fine for somebody to go on our corporate Slack channel in the announcements and do a whole rant about Easter and Jesus and whatever. But if I said anything like, "Hey, that's not true," I would be concerned about my personal position.
Mm.
Yeah, I'm super curious about how people feel about that.
Let's see what we get. Let's see. Mark Caesar says, I reasoned my way out of religion when I was 11 years old. The term atheist really has no negative connotation for me. For me, leaving Christianity in one respect was not difficult because my family was always divided. They were
Yeah,
always
that's
about
super
half and
interesting.
half. Yeah, and so I just left one side and joined the other side.
That's super interesting. Yeah, our community was so homogeneously Catholic.
Mhm.
I didn't even know other religions besides like Lutheran even existed in the small town that I grew up in. It was so sheltered.
Love True Music says, I identify as atheist and have since I was 14. Don't think anything of it. Uh, and Maya says, half the community
Yeah,
has godless and atheist in their moniker. Yep. Yep.
that's so true.
Um, okay, I wanted to talk about a couple of other products that you have available because it is
Yeah.
kind of neat that you have so many different atheist products available. Tell us about some of the other things that you have.
So let's see. I do a lot of jewelry
Hmm.
because I think about, James Avery, where you wear there. And there's actually a concept in the Jewish faith about wear the words. So I really love to dig back into quotes and other things that are of meaning to me and put those words into jewelry. Um, I also have a really lovely necktie that has the atheist A symbol strand wrapped in DNA, which is a
Oh,
really
cool.
nice, subtle. Yep, I have that in a necktie and in a
I
sock.
gotta
And
get
actually,
that for my
yeah,
son.
yeah, check it
Yeah,
out.
I was first thinking it'd be cool to get that for my husband, but my husband's still a believer, so I can't do that. But I could get that for my son.
Yeah, no, the two, and I have it also in kind of like a Hawaiian shirt.
Hmm.
We launched that just at the convention. So you see that there's like a subtle blue colorway, and then there's the more, the red A, that atheist scarlet A that I think kicked off in like 2017.
Hmm.
What else? What else? We do leggings. I do a lot of Christmas ornaments, believe it
Hmm.
or not. I like to mix science with um, the reverence of science with the reverence that people feel for religion. So one of my favorite pieces is a Christmas ornament that looks like stained glass, but it's actually a phylogenetic tree diagram, which is a scientific diagram that talks about how we're all connected. Cufflinks. I love that question. I've not done cufflinks yet, but send me an email and let's talk about it.
Yeah, that's
When I was chatting with folks at the convention, people loved the necktie, but they were like, but I never wear neckties anymore. I was like, oh,
mm,
that's super
mm.
useful to know. Like, I feel like, yeah, there's certainly space for somebody to do, like for a wedding or something like that. But I do feel like neckties, business casual is so everywhere now. What
Well,
else?
the
Go ahead.
wedding idea is kind of funny because I was thinking, I know my son would love to wear that, and we've got a wedding that's coming up soon, but my sister would be so offended if my son wore that necktie. I wore an atheist T-shirt, and I don't even remember which one it was. It was either one that just simply said "Godless Granny,"
Hmm.
or it was Godless Engineers that said "What's up, heathens." That's
Nice.
all the shirt said. It was one or other of those. And my sister was insulted that I wore that on the weekend of her daughter's wedding, not at the wedding, not at the rehearsal dinner, not at any wedding event, but just that I wore that at one point during the weekend. Just how dare you wear that where my friends could see that? And I was
But
like,
she was wearing a crucifix, I bet.
oh, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, like that. Yeah, the street goes two ways. And that's where I love to play is it's like, you know what? The street goes two ways,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And but I do like that space where you can ask a question. So um we are star stuff. That's another one. I don't know if did anybody catch the aurora borealis that was visible here in North America a couple 2 weeks
I looked
ago?
for it, but we could not see it here.
We got super lucky. I'm in North Carolina where the
Hmm.
clouds, it's often a cloudy sky, but the clouds cleared that night. And our neighbors, who are also heathens, sent me a message like, hey, I know you're going to want to see this. We can see the aurora. So we were out on our front lawns together looking up. And the trick was to look through your phone because your phone can capture and process a little bit more light. But it was really lovely. It actually reminded me of the We Are Star Stuff Christmas ornament I did because it was those heavy pinks and purples across the
Hmm.
sky.
Hmm.
Yeah, it was really, really cool.
Cool. Now, you mentioned earlier that you had been a science teacher.
Yes, I taught
Um,
in a science museum when I was in college.
At a museum, did you say?
Yes. So
Cool.
much more rapt audience than in a traditional school.
Ah, okay. Did you teach a particular science subject?
No, I would teach different workshops.
Okay.
So we might do a slime lab around non-Newtonian fluids. We might do an engineering lab where we learned about how trains work.
Mm, mhm.
It was a more focused, in the science museum where you go in and you do a thing and then you go about your business. Yeah, we did things like that. And yeah, in a museum setting, you don't have. It's just not as the kids are much happier to be there. So it's an
Yeah.
easier setting. Like I was a substitute teacher at my child's school when he was young. That's a very different audience as far as like, are they happy to be here? Maybe, maybe not. But it was really, really fun because you could really light kids up. And it's really lovely to watch someone have those aha moments and to
Mhm,
see that wonder.
mhm.
It's really special.
Mm. Did you teach anything that was controversial?
We didn't, at
Mhm,
least not to me.
mhm.
No, it was all really basic, hard science. There was nothing in there. Yeah, we didn't even get into this was in the 90s. So we weren't even able, like today, you could extract DNA, and DNA, in my opinion, is controversial because if you believe Bible stories, you can't believe DNA. So, because you can't, like, evolution is evident in DNA, like, you can't
Right.
believe in genetics and
Mhm.
like genetic diseases if you don't believe in DNA, and you can't believe in DNA if you believe the Bible is true. So, let's see, how much knowledge in mathematics do you incorporate into your engineering
Yeah, that's
classes?
what I was waiting to put up.
Yeah, we
Uh,
did not have a ton of mathematics that we had the kids do because they were typically elementary age. And my goal was for them to have fun and enjoy themselves. So if we, like for me as as the teacher, if we had to gloss over a thing, we would just move on to the next exciting thing.
mm.
Godseed, I want to hear more about teaching necromancy.
Yeah, that does sound interesting. Interesting pair of comments. I had this up a moment ago. Purple said, "When my eldest daughter was in middle school, they tried to suspend a
Yep.
girl for wearing a pentacle." And Purple says, "I went to the school office arguing they couldn't suspend a student for that unless they would suspend all the teachers who wore crosses."
Have you, Purple Rhymes with Orange, are you familiar with the Satanic Temple? I'm
Oh
guessing you
yeah,
probably are. Yeah,
yeah.
so they have those great cards. I've talked to my kids about this. They don't carry them with them, but they have those great cards that kids can carry if the teachers like won't give them a bathroom break and stuff like that. And they'll tell them to come out swinging pretty hard for you if teachers, if a school tries to pull that. But I feel like on the flip side, what you run into is the social shunning that happens with that. And, for your kids, what I think about for my kids, like, and I'll tell them, like, you can totally wear that t-shirt that says, "Let's start a cult," that has a
Mm,
pentagram on it. That's
mhm,
totally fine. I think your shirt's funny and you do too. But you need to be prepared for the reactions that you might get.
mhm,
Like,
mhm,
just be ready for that.
mhm.
Um, but yeah, we've not had anybody have to go to the office yet. Max, so the Satanic Temple, here's something super interesting. When I was chatting with the folks at American Atheist, they pointed out that it's sometimes hard to build coalition with Satanic Temple because Satanic Temple will lean into building a church, but just also into the absurdity of it.
Mhm.
So instead of trying to make it illegal, they lean into the absurdity. Anyway, I think there's room for all of the voices, but I thought that was really interesting when they were talking about building a political coalition to increase separation of church and state.
One thing that I saw happen as a CASA volunteer that I thought was really interesting was, one time one of my older kids said that she was a Satanist, and she happened to be in a locked facility at the time, and I was surprised at how accommodating, her social worker was, that her social worker immediately offered her a satanic Bible and asked her what, if anything, she needed in order to practice her religion, and
Wow. Her
yeah.
social worker doesn't want to get sued. That's my takeaway.
I was fairly certain, and I turned out to be right, that she wasn't really a Satan worshiper, she
Mhm.
said that for attention. But it was interesting that they really bent over backwards to try to accommodate her.
Yeah, that's very cool. That's
Mhm.
very cool.
Well, we are out of time.
All right. Let me give a quick plug. If you guys
Okay.
would like to get a free Atheist Grief Bingo card, go to my website, betsydeville.com, and sign up. And if you sign up today, I'll do a drawing later tonight and I'll send you a free copy of my book. And you
Okay.
guys do know I have an Etsy shop. That's also a great way to reach out to me.
Okay, wonderful. And there is a link to Betsy's Etsy shop in the description. Or you can look her up on Twitter if you'd like to get in touch with her that way. Betsy, thank you so much for coming. It has been an absolute pleasure having you.
This was an absolute delight. And thank you so much for having me.
And thank you to all of you in the chat for your comments and questions. It's been a pleasure being able to be with you. Next week, my guest will be, okay, what was his name again? I forgot his name. But if you remember Eric Hernandez from last week, okay, it's Brady Blevins, who works with Eric Hernandez at watchtower.com. And he is going to be on, and he is going to try to convince me that Christianity is true. So that is going to be an interesting stream next week.
Good luck to him.
Yeah. Okay, everyone, live your life.